There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn, Breathe Books. Welcome back to my channel and my final book haul of 2024. I have almost a full shelf there of books yet to unhaul, but this will be the last one I get to edit and post before the year's out. So let's get going. First, this is the second edition of a novel I cannot wait to read and absolutely must get to in 2025, and that is the Saskatchewan novel Small Reckonings by Karin Melberg Schwier. Karin was my mystery guest a couple months ago, and oh my god, this novel sounds fascinating. Set in maybe early 20th century. A transplanted New Zealander homesteads in Saskatchewan, and then after he gets married, he and his daughter have a, I guess we would say, developmentally delayed daughter. At that time they were called, quite horrifically, called feeble-minded. And plot ensues. It sounds absolutely fascinating. I had picked up a used copy of the first edition. Oh, I see, this is the third edition, 2023, and there were some differences, she told me. Plus, I liked the cover of this one much better. So I'm hauling it again. I don't think I ever hauled it, the first edition, but it's not the one I'm going to read. And I'm pretty sure this is available from the publisher or whatever. I'll put all those links in the show notes. You can get it even outside Canada, I believe. My lights that I use for making videos in my apartment, because the overhead light is just gross, they're flashing, but I don't see it showing up on the video, so I hope it doesn't. The opening chapter is from the perspective of a RCMP constable, Canadian policeman, 1935, at the Usick Farm. I will just read the short opening paragraph. Constable Dickinson took off his Stetson in the doorway, slapped it against the sleeve of his brown serge, and waited for his eyes to adjust to the dim interior of the barn. The cows looked like they'd been bunched up out at the gate for a good while, bellowing, their bony spines arched and white, hoarfrost on their haunches. He breathed in as much air as the dust and stench of scours would allow, and took a few steps inside. Oh, I'm going to read the next sentence, the first sentence of the second paragraph. He looked up first and saw the body, then broke his gaze when a calf bleated, a pitiful thin noise, off to the left. Oh my goodness. Here is one of the most talked about and I think well-received novels of the year. Sally Rooney's. This is her third novel, or fourth, I can't lost track, but Intermezzo. This is the American edition, because I liked it better than the cover for the British edition, which is not the way it usually goes. I know that this is a bit of a departure for Sally Rooney in that her main characters are much older than the protagonists in the previous novels. I wouldn't have minded if they were still that age, but yeah, I'm interested to try this. Exquisitely moving story about grief, love, and family. This is the epigraph. It's first in German, which I will not try to pronounce, and then translated into English. It's Ludwig Wittgenstein from Philosophical Investigations. But don't you feel grief now? But aren't you now playing chess? Well, I'm none the wiser about that, but let's hear the opening paragraph, even though it's a bit long. Didn't seem fair on the young lad. That suit at the funeral, with the braces on his teeth, the supreme discomfort of the adolescent. On such occasions, one could almost come to regret one's own social brilliance. Gives him the excuse, or gives him in any case, someone at whom to look pleadingly between the mandatory handshakes. God love him. Nearly 23 now. Ivan the Terrible. Difficult, actually, to believe the suit on him. Picked it up, perhaps, in some little damp-smelling second-hand shop for the local hospice. Paid in cash. Rode it home on his bicycle, crumpled in a reusable plastic bag. Yes, that in fact would make sense of it. Would bring into alignment the suit in its resplendent ugliness and the personality of the younger brother, 10 years younger. Not without style in his own way. Certain kind of panache in his absolute disregard for the material world. Brains and beauty, an aunt said once, about them both. Or was it Ivan Brains and Peter Beauty? Thanks, I think. He crosses Watling Street, now towards the apartment that is not an apartment, the house that is not a house. 11 or is it 12 days since the funeral. Back in town. Back at work, such as it is. Or back, anyway, to Naomi's place. And what will she be wearing when she answers the door? Slides his phone from his pocket into the palm of his hand as he reaches the front step. Cool tactility of the screen as it lights under his fingers, typing. Outside. Evening's drawing in now, and she's back at her lectures, presumably. No reply, but she sees the message, and then the predictable sequence, the so familiar and by now indirectly arousing sequence of sounds, as behind the front door she comes up the old basement staircase and into the hall. Classical conditioning. How did it take so long to figure that out? Common sense? Not that. Everyday experience. The relationship of memory and feeling. The opening door. Well, that's quite lovely writing. Next is a hardcover copy of the one Rohinton mystery novel I have not yet read. I think he has also a short story collection that I haven't read, but of his 3 major novels, Family Matters, which I believe was his most recent one, is the one that I haven't gotten to yet. Let's see if I've got that right. Yeah, his short stories, Tales from the Feroja Bag, was 1987, and then Such a Long Journey, which I've read, and then the one that just bowled me over was the middle novel, A Fine Balance, and this is the 3rd. And this came out in 2002, and we haven't heard a peep from the man since, barely. He's been living in Canada for 40 years. Did you know that? Longer, since 1975. This is set in Bombay in the mid-1990s, and I absolutely refuse to read another thing about it until I start reading it. I'll read the opening few paragraphs of Chapter 1. A splash of light from the late afternoon sun lingered at the foot of Nariman's bed as he ended his nap and looked towards the clock. It was almost 6. He glanced down where the warm patch had lured his toes. Knurled and twisted, rendered bird-like by age, they luxuriated in the sun's comfort. His eyes fell shut again. By and by, the scrap of sunshine drifted from his feet, and he felt a vague pang of abandonment. He looked at the clock again. Gone past 6 now. With some difficulty he rose to prepare for his evening walk. In the bathroom, while he slapped cold water on his face and gargled, he heard his stepson and stepdaughter over the sound of the tap. "Please don't go, Papa, we beseech you," said Jal through the door, then grimaced and adjusted his hearing aid, for the words had echoed deafeningly in his own ear. The device was an early model. A metal case the size of a matchbox was clipped to his shirt pocket and wired to the earpiece. It had been a reluctant acquisition 4 years ago, when Jal had turned 45, but he was not yet used to its vagaries. "There, that's better," he said to himself, before becoming loud again. "Now, Papa, is it too much to ask? Please stay home, for your own good." I don't remember where I got this, but this may have been a hand-me-down from my friend Kathy. This is the one Kazuo Ishiguro novel that I actually would like to try. It's apparently his best, and probably the one that might be most a Shawn book. I've really disliked everything else by him I've read, but this sounds like kind of a classic British novel. Everybody knows about it. And didn't it win him the Booker or something? 1989. The opening is in 1956. Here's the opening paragraph. "It seems increasingly likely that I really will undertake the expedition that has been preoccupying my imagination now for some days. An expedition, I should say, which I will undertake alone, in the comfort of Mr. Faraday's Ford. An expedition which, as I foresee it, will take me through much of the finest countryside of England to the West Country, and may keep me away from Darlington Hall for as much as 5 or 6 days. The idea of such a journey came about, I should point out, from a most kind suggestion put to me by Mr. Faraday himself, one afternoon, almost a fortnight ago, when I had been dusting the portraits in the library. In fact, as I recall, I was up on the step-ladder dusting the portrait of Viscount Weatherby, when my employer, having entered carrying a few volumes which he presumably wished, returned to the shelves. On seeing my person, he took the opportunity to inform me that he had just that moment finalized plans to return to the United States for a period of 5 weeks, between August and September. Having made this announcement, my employer put his volumes down on a table, seated himself on the chaise longue, and stretched out his legs. It was then, gazing up at me, that he said, "You realize, Stevens, I don't expect you to be locked up here in this house all the time I'm away. Why don't you take the car and drive off somewhere for a few days? You look like you could make good use of a break." Next is Helen Knott's second memoir, Becoming a Matriarch. I went to the book launch for this in Saskatoon. Her debut was called In My Moccasins. I hauled it a video or two ago. She is a Daniza, Nahia, Métis, and mixed Euro descent woman from Prophet River First Nations. Lives in Fort St. John, BC. The first chapter is called Birth and Introduction, and there is maybe an epigraph from something called I May Destroy You. Your birth is my birth, your death is my death. And then, a record of births. Nina Chapizia birthed June, Mary, John, and a baby who died upon entry into this world. June Bigfoot birthed Diane, Connie, Shirley, Charlene, and raised Sharon and Tyler as blood, and so they were. Shirley Knott birthed Helen, Richie, Shane, and Traylon. Helen birthed Matthias. The women before me birthed babies in fours. 4 children equaled 4 mouths, and then some, to feed. 4 lives created meant 36 months of being pregnant and an unknown number of years spent lactating. Milk, blood, sweat, and sacrifice filled rooms. 4 births for one body. One birth being so excruciating that it claimed Grandma Nina's last breaths. The baby did not survive the birth either. The 4s ended with me, the 4th generation. Even though I have what one would classify as baby birthing hips, I have one child, a modest number. Thick, wide, and gently sloped, these hips mimic the southeastern edge of the territory to which they belong. That edge is where the mountains have started to humble themselves into hills, and if you go behind the reach of my people's lands, the hills start to surrender to endless prairie. The span of my hips is a landscape unto itself, and it has seen its own wars and made its own offerings for peace. Well, that last line is quite stunning. Here is a book translated from Irish. It's called Am Louie, and there is the name of the author, and then the translator is also an Irish name, and I have read another book that translator translated, but I've completely forgotten how to pronounce it. So here is the audio.
I Am Louie by Eoghan Ó Tuairisc, and translated into English by poet and author Mícheál Ó.
And I don't really know why I bought this, other than that I'm interested in Irish literature. The author was born in 1919 in County Galway, and he was known as an innovative stylist in Irish and English. His dates are 1919 to 1982. In this novel, the titular protagonist, Louis, is 6 years old in the early 1920s. It sounds like it is a story of his childhood, this Louis's childhood. And this has an epigraph from Martin Luther. Because it's not the letters in the Latin language you have to ask how to speak, but the mother at home, the children on the street, the common man in the market. So I'll read the opening 2 paragraphs of chapter 1. I am older than him. Before Dada came, I was. Him is my mouth and is a boy. I will tell you who he is. Louis is his name. All the lads call him Ludine, but his name properly is me. I'll tell you about the 3 of us. Me and him and the other lad. That's the 3 of us. Me and the other lad talk in Louis's head, but he rarely hears me. Louis speaks English. I have to get used to it and see the whole world through his little eyes. He is sunk down in the world, but thank God he is curious. I can make up sentences. A big letter and a full stop. That's what a sentence is. Oh, Ludine, Ludine, you shouldn't say sentence, says Sister Alacoque. You have to say it like this. Look at my mouth. Well, that is rather experimental, challenging writing, but I'm quite intrigued by that. After I got it in my hot little hands, Ronan Hessian tweeted about having read it and enjoyed it, so that's a good sign. Next is an NYRB book, During the Reign of the Queen of Persia by Joan Chase. I got this for 2 reasons. The first reason is I listened to a fabulous episode of the One Bright Book podcast about this novel. Dorian Stuber is one of the co-hosts, and I just loved what I heard about it. So I bought it, and then I submitted it for voting for my Patreon book club, and this is one of the ones we're going to do sometime in 2025, so I'm very excited about it. 3 Generations of Women. Good Lord, what else do we need to know? Published in 1983. I'll read the opening 2 paragraphs of part 1, which is entitled Celia. In northern Ohio, there is a county of some 100,000 arable acres, which breaks with the lake region flatland and begins to roll and climb, and to change into rural settings. Roadside clusters of houses, small settlements that repose on the edge of nowhere, single-lane bridges, backwater country stores with a single rusting gas pump, barns advertising mail pouch and frayed and faded postings. Those traces of human habitation recede, balanced by the luxuriant curving hills, cliffs like lounging flanks, water chutes that rapidly lose themselves in gladed ravines. Fields of wheat or oats surrounded by dark trees seem to unreel as part of a native flair. Occasionally, gloomy, forgotten farmsteads loom. There are a few proud spreads, fastidiously tended enclaves of the Amish and the Mennonites. Deep into the country originates the hump of railroad lines circling the market town that is the county seat. A small denominational college distinguishes it as the center of culture as well. The downtown square is a brisk trading area, its broad avenue resolving into a central square which, framed by 3-story buildings, seems as though it is entirely walled. Within the sandstone blocks, stripped of the hillsides and mined from mountains to the south, glistens still the jeweled dust of crushed quartz. All the streets are brick-paved. A dark earthen red, they bear the imprint of their manufacture. Metropolitan. Canton, 1905 Cleveland Block. Egyptian, Sciotoville. Well, that's a very old-fashioned way to open a novel. It was a lovely writing, but yeah, I'm shocked that it opens with such a long-winded description of the setting. But now I think I got this one because when I found out a little bit about it, I suggested to Heidi of My Reading Life that we buddy read it, and I think she said yes. I hope I'm not dreaming that. It's called Hides by Rod Moody-Corbett, and it was published, I think, just this year or last year. This year, the publisher's called Breakwater in St. John's, Newfoundland, with characters or setting that goes between Newfoundland and Calgary, Alberta. It's set in very contemporary Canada with the horrific wildfires that burn Canada up kilometer by kilometer every summer because of global warming. So it's set in that context. 4 friends on a wilderness hunting trip in northwestern Newfoundland to commemorate the death of one of their sons, killed in a mass shooting in Calgary the year before. Wow, okay. But I think it's quite a bit about environmental stuff, which is why I suggested it to Heidi, one of the co-organizers of the Book Naturalist Club on BookTube. Here is a very short epigraph from Herman Melville from Moby Dick. I felt a melting in me. I'll read the opening page of chapter 1. I thought commemorating the anniversary of Travis's death with a hunting trip absurd, and I said so. Travis was Willis's boy, the older one, and one of the Holbrook Station dead. As to the general and not-so-general mechanisms of that tragedy, and I think the word holds in this instance, I am reluctant to speculate. The shooter was dead before the train stopped. That this detail, along with its morbid prequel, should remain for however many minutes unknown, and what's worse, markedly unimaginable, to those west-going passengers idling up and down the Holbrook Station platform, skimming their phones, texting, shying up the occasional chin to peer with pristine gloominess at the arrival board's unblinking red clock, gives rise to a sudden, ungovernable paralysis. Which is to say nothing, of course, for the victims, for all those hapless travelers cowering and clutching each other in the adjoining cars. I ride buses now and spurn all subterranean transit. I realize there is little logic in this. No broader blueprint, no rational design, yet the sight of a train slinking through a cold, glassy skyline sets my heart thumping. I experience a similar arrhythmic twinge, a light but veiny flutter coursing all down the stems of my wrists, on elevators and planes, even on bridges, bounded by river and sky. Well, that's pretty darned interesting. I wonder why it's called Hides. Here is a Sharon Butala novel that I didn't have and haven't read. It's called, and is it a novel? No, I think it's a memoir. Called Wildstone Heart, An Apprentice in the Fields. The premise of the memoir is that she and her husband Peter decide to let the field return to its natural state. So kind of a rewilding thing. Oh, that sounds fabulous. Published 24 years ago, year 2000. And here is a lengthy epigraph from a Lakota creation story. Ian, the rock, existed in a void. It was dark and lonely there. Ian wished to create something other, so that he would not be lonely, and so that he could have some power over something other than himself. He pierced himself, and his blood, which was blue, flowed out until he was shriveled, hard, and powerless. What came from him formed Maka'aina, Mother Earth. The blue also formed the oceans, but the released powers could not reside in the water, so they formed the blue sky dome and called it Mapiato, blue sky. The energy given up by the rock, now hard and powerless, is Taku Skan Skan, that which moves all things. This power is now diffused into the female earth, the male sky, and the waters. I'll read the opening two paragraphs from the prologue. Our house was haunted. It was haunted from the time it was an unfinished shell sitting on its foundation next door to the small log house in which we lived in a wide river valley, some miles from East End, Saskatchewan, so called because it's at the east end of the Cypress Hills. Until recently, a period of a good 20 years. I say haunted blithely, without apprehension, not caring any more if I'm believed or not. I know no other word for what happened to us, and there is no other explanation, although for a very long time I would never have said so out loud. Since 1913, when my husband's father had arrived from Slovakia to join his two brothers already in Canada, the Butalas had slowly built up their ranch on the wide grasslands of the northern Great Plains, just over the border from Montana, and in the extreme southwest corner of Saskatchewan. By the time Peter and I married in 1976, it was more than 13,000 acres. Here Peter and his siblings had been raised, and here I came as a bride. But as the ranch was 40 dirt or gravel, often impassable miles from the small hay farm the Butalas also owned, we decided, after much argument, to locate our new house at the farm. This decision was based on the long distance the ranch was from the nearest town, on the inadequate roads, which were often blocked in winter, and especially on the ranch's openness to the elements. There was not a tree or any other barrier to break the sweep of winter blizzards which struck the cattle, horses, and buildings with overwhelming, barely endurable force. So that revisits a lot of her life that she wrote about in The Perfection of the Morning, but this is going to end up talking about this rewilding project, but that sounds absolutely fascinating. I wonder if my mom has read this one yet. Now, I don't know why I didn't put the two books together, but I won a couple of Virago Modern Classics from a giveaway that the lovely Nora, I've forgotten her Instagram account, but she's a lovely Belgian bookish person with a large, adoring bookish social media presence living in Dublin. And my name got drawed for this one and one other one. This one is by Pamela Francow, called A Wreath for the Enemy. He made that draw at the beginning of Spinster September this year. This was originally published in 1954, and this reprint 1988. Francow died in 1967, aged about 60. Apparently he was one of the most popular writers of her generation, both in Britain and America. The protagonist, Penelope, is a precocious daughter of a poet, and there's a friendship with kind of a more upper middle class family that includes lots of children, the Bradleys. That's all I need to know about it. I'll read the first 3 paragraphs. I'll put it on the page the way it's set out. It's kind of confusing because there's a section 1 in the middle of it. I sat still at the table with the blank paper before me. I went back. I remembered. I thought my way in. It was the sensation of pulling on a diver's helmet and going down deep. Presently, on the seafloor, I began to find lost things, to raise the moods that were mine when I was 14 years old, sitting in this garden, writing my anthology of hates. I would begin there. 1. There had been 2 crises already that day before the cook's husband called to assassinate the cook. Now that is a fabulous opening line. The stove caught fire in my presence. The postman had fallen off his bicycle at the gate and been bitten by Charlemagne, our sheepdog, whose policy it was to attack people only when they were down. Whenever there were 2 crises, my stepmother, Jean, said, "Jamais deux sans toi." This morning, she and Francis, my father, had debated whether the 2 things happening to the postman could be counted as 2 separate crises, and might therefore be said to have cleared matters up. I thought that they were wasting their time. In our household, things went on and on and on happening. It was a hotel, which made the doom worse. It would have been remarkable to have 2 days without a crisis, and even if we did, I doubted whether the rule would apply in reverse, so that we could augur a 3rd. I was very fond of the word augur. Oh my god, I freaking love that so much. I want to just absolutely keep reading it. Well, I read one of Susan Scarlett, which was the pseudonym for Noel Stretfield. She wrote a series of romantic novels in the 40s, the 30s and 40s, under this pen name. Yeah, from about 1939 to 1951 or something. And I loved it so much, it's called Clothes Pegs from 1939, that this is the second one after that I bought, and I haven't read the other 2 yet, but this one is called Summer Pudding. I put a link to my review of Clothes Pegs, because it really did deeply satisfy me. So this one is also set in the war. When was this one written? 1943. And the protagonist, Janet, has been bombed out of her job in London. Comes to a village, the village of Worsingford. And on the little synopsis, which you know how much I eschew looking at the synopsis too much, but this is a great line. In brackets, surely a case of going from bad to Worsingford. That's all I need to know about the premise. I'll read the first few paragraphs. The train ran out from London. Straggling narrow streets and cramped houses, little gardens flapping with washing, and chickens, and crowded with rabbit hutches, and the family effort at digging for victory, dreary, gaping, bombed areas, all gave way to fields, hedges, and a blue distance. Janet had managed to get not only a seat, but a corner seat. She sat relaxed, her grey eyes staring through the window. It was early summer. The fields were spangled with daisies and buttercups. The first dog roses were opening. She took a deep breath, and in doing so moved, and her book slipped off her knee, and in retrieving it her elbow dug into the person sitting next to her. "I'm so sorry," she apologized. Her neighbor was a girl, slim, with red hair and brown eyes. She was, Janet noticed, expensively dressed. The sort of clothes that look good always, no matter how long they've been owned. The sort of clothes, in fact, that she had always wanted herself, and was sure it was an economy to buy, only she never had the money to do it. "It's all right," the girl laughed. "We can't very well turn without knocking each other. Sort of, when father turns, we all turn. Awful traveling these days, isn't it? Daddy told me to travel first, but I won't in wartime, and anyway, it wouldn't be any better. Everybody gets in everywhere, and it would just be a waste of money." And it goes on, but I love how it opens, and this phrase I'm curious about. She's admiring the expensive clothes, and she says, or it says she was sure it was an economy to buy, which I guess in this context means, like, the whole economy of a country, i.e. expensive, not economical. That's interesting. Wow, well, this sounds lovely. Well, here is the second copy of a novel I owned and got rid of over the years without ever reading. A Visitation of Spirits by Randall Keenan. He was a queer black American writer. He died in 2020, and I have never read anything he wrote, so I must rectify this, and I found this on the discount shelf, marked down, no remainder mark, at the bookstore up the street. So, this is one of his most well-known novels, and it's been published maybe since the 80s. Yeah, 1989. On the back it says, he's the one who brought literary fiction, the Southern Black Gay experience. Well, that's why he must be read. A 16-year-old Horace, who I assume is black and gay. Here's a couple epigraphs. The first is from A Christmas Carol. Are spirits' lives so short? Asked Scrooge. My life upon this globe is very brief, replied the ghost. It ends tonight. Tonight? Cried Scrooge. Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near. And from Neuromancer by William Gibson. How many novels would yoke those two epigraphs together? To call up a demon, you must learn its name. Men dreamed that once, but now it is real in another way. I'll read the opening few lines here from December 8th, 1985. Lord, 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 she said. The first time she slipped on the grass and fell that morning, he rushed to her, but she shooed him away and clambered slowly to her feet. But then, after a few precious steps, she fell again. Lord, Lord, Lord. This time she just sat there on the frost-covered lawn, between her house and Jimmy's car, her head hung down, her eyes closed. You okay, Aunt Ruth? You want some help? Jimmy stood less than 2 feet from his great-aunt, but he hesitated. When he walked up to her and stooped over to pick her up, she opened her eyes and shot him a look that sent slivers of ice through his veins. I'm fine. Leave me be. I can get up on my own. Just leave me a spell. Well, so that is my mammoth book haul, the last one of the year, and I would have to say, I think it's pretty obvious, the one that has really grabbed me unexpectedly is this 1954 novel by Pamela Frankow, A Wreath for the Enemy. It just really, I just loved it, but there's none that were a turn-off, and I really want to get to Intermezzo soon, and the small Reckonings Saskatchewan one I started with, I'm really, really drawn to that one, and they all sound pretty darn good. Which one might you be most likely to start first? Because you know you're going to read them all eventually. Thanks for watching.